Hello, readers of good books. My name is Nick Pell, and this is my book review of N0S4A2. Now, I want to make this clear right away just because there's an AMC series based on this book running at the moment. This is a review of the book, the novel by Joe Hill. So I'm going to be talking about everything that's in that and talking about pretty much the entirety of it because I want to talk about this book. So if you don't want spoilers for that show, potentially, probably come back once it's done with the first season or whatever. Or if you're in the middle of reading it right now, probably come back once you finished it, because again, I'm going to talk about the entirety of the book, so I don't want to ruin things for you. So N0S4A2 is a book which was written, like I said, by Joe Hill back in 2013. It focuses on this girl named Vic McQueen, and she has this ability to create basically a direct line to anything that she's trying to find via her mind and via this bridge, which was broken down many years ago, but which she is able to recreate and use basically as a transport system to get her where she needs to go, called the Shorter Way Bridge. She discovers this power early on in her life, and she ends up at first using it just to find everyday items. Like her mom forgets a bracelet on vacation, she uses it to find that bracelet and bring it back. Somebody forgets an item in their school locker, she uses it to get back there and retrieve the item, and it takes her basically directly to wherever it is that she's looking for. But can also lead her to trouble. And after an argument with her parents one day, she ends up running off using the bridge to find trouble, and she ends up running into Charlie Manx. And he is someone else who actually has an ability that he's able to produce with his mind, in which he is basically tied to this Rolls-Royce Wraith car. And basically for the last 100 years or so, he has been using said car to basically abduct children and drive them to a place called Christmas Land. And while driving them to that place, he basically absorbs their souls and their humanity and their youth, and basically turns them into these monsters. He uses their energy in order to keep himself looking youthful, and he's lived for like 135 years or something of that sort. And one thing which I found really interesting about this book overall is its protagonist, Vic McQueen, because the book is one of the few that I've read, at least of recent memory, that focuses on a character pretty much throughout the entirety of their life. We see her as this young girl who is first discovering her abilities, and the book goes all the way up to when she is basically, I think, like in her 30s or 40s as an adult, as a parent, and basically trying to rescue her son from Charlie Manx, and basically ending up dying at the end of the book. So we do get to see pretty much her whole entire life laid out on these pages. And one thing which makes her a really interesting protagonist is that she's not really someone who's all high and mighty and virtuous and things of that sort. She comes from a very broken family. Her father was abusive to her mother. They split up very early on, and she just did not have a great relationship with either of them after a point. And so just the fact that she then kind of doesn't have the best mentality and doesn't raise her son, at least right away, the best, and doesn't have the best relationship with him necessarily right off the bat, is really interesting to see that dynamic play out, because she even goes into like drugs, alcohol, is in an insane asylum essentially for a number of years as she's trying to basically cope with the idea that this Shorter Way Bridge, or this power that she has, is actually just all in her mind and non-existent. And it just makes for an extremely interesting character, because you just see her grappling with what we know, or we assume, I guess, to be real throughout the course of the book with her using this ability, but just her trying to comprehend it being real, and everyone telling her, no, you're basically using it as a coping mechanism for when she encountered Charlie Manx for the first time. And so yeah, I could talk for a while about Vic McQueen, but she is easily one of my favorite characters that I've read of recent memory, and easily my favorite character of the book itself, just because of how well she's written. And Joe Hill, he does his chapters in a very interesting fashion, in that they're not necessarily chapters so much as just telling you where the events are taking place, such as either in here, Iowa, or in the library, or inside or outside. And it's just extremely unique with how it does that, because I've just never seen it done that way before. And he'll even have the ends of certain chapters just not end their sentences and just lead into the title of the next chapter. And it just makes it for a very fascinating read in that extent. And I really enjoyed how it was able to do that just so fluidly. And I also do have to talk about Charlie Manx, the main antagonist of this book, because he and his relationship with Bing, who's basically his accomplice throughout the majority of the story, is also a very interesting one, because from what I recall from the beginning of the book, Bing is someone who isn't terribly satisfied with his life and ends up getting a call from Charles Manx after he sends in for, I believe it was like a job application or something, which was in a newspaper or a magazine ad a while back, if I'm remembering that correctly. But he ends up encountering Charlie Manx and ends up working for him. Basically, he helps Charlie kidnap children, and you get to see chapters which focus on their planning of these kidnappings. You never actually see chapters where they're necessarily taking place. You see like newspaper articles being read by Vic or whoever the main character of the chapter at the time, basically detailing, oh hey, this prominent piano player or something ended up going missing and her parents haven't been seen since, or someone took a cab from an airport and just never ended up being seen because it was the wrong cab or something like that. And Bing is easily just a character which you would love to hate, because he's basically the person who is left to deal with the parents of these children, because while Manx is driving them off to Christmas land and basically absorbing their youth and stealing their personalities, he is dealing with the parents. He gasses them with this like cinnamon gas thing, which makes them a lot more obedient, or at least wanting to listen to commands and whatnot. And so he does a lot of very bad things. Very sexual and not great things to the parents before he ends up killing them eventually. And it's just this character who you really love to hate. And so when Vic, as an adult, inevitably runs into him when she is trying to find Wayne, who's been taken by Charlie Manx at this point, their confrontation is probably one of the more nail-biting parts of the chapter, because I had a general assumption that he was going to be fine, but just the fact that she came so close to not being fine was just the real nail-biting part of it. But just the way that he ended up going out, just having one of the canisters of his gas just flying off and basically just cutting him in two. It's just like, yeah, you deserve that, you're a dick. But I also like that we got a little bit of backstory for Bing at the same time. We got to know kind of like how he got his gas mask and where he was working at the time, and just basically what his life was like before he met Charles Manx. And basically the main small issue that I have with the book is that we don't really know a lot about Charlie Manx's life prior to him starting to do these long car trips to Christmas land. There's a chapter where he's talking to Wayne in his car where he kind of touches on the idea, oh hey, I had a wife, I had 2 daughters, and he goes into kind of how that relationship wasn't the best thing, and it doesn't end very well for him. But we don't really get a huge amount of backstory to his character. As far as I know, based on what I've heard about the AMC show, they seem to be going into a little bit more backstory with his character, and as far as I know, the show is being somewhat overseen by Joe Hill, so I'm assuming that's all going to be canon to some extent. But yeah, that's just something which I would have liked to see a little bit more of in the book. It's just getting a little more backstory about Charlie Manx and just kind of learning more about his motivations and why he feels so justified in doing what he's doing. And then Wayne is kind of the last character which I'm going to touch on in this review, because he's basically the other secondary main character of the story, because once he starts to have chapters coming from his perspective, it's really interesting to see how he views Vic as well as Lou, his father. And because we've been seeing most of the story through Vic's eyes and seeing her thoughts and feelings and reactions to certain things, but it's really interesting to see her from the outside in and just seeing how she looks and how she's been acting from another person's perspective, that being of her son. It just becomes kind of this mirror reflection of how she saw her parents to an extent at the beginning of the book. And it's just, it would be really interesting to see some comparisons in regards to those two factors. I think generally Vic is probably a better parent than her parents were to her, but that's also very arguable too. Just for the fact that we see her perspective on a lot of things and we are able to emphasize more with her character as opposed to her parents. The end of the story is also very well done in my opinion, because obviously we eventually have Victoria and Charlie Manx meeting up in Christmas Land. Charlie has brought her son Wayne to Christmas Land at this point after being abducted, and you just get to see this just almost suicidal side of Victoria as she's basically willing to do whatever it takes to save her son and destroy Christmas Land. She basically brings explosives from her father and just starts blowing things up everywhere. And it seems like the children who are there, who are basically vampires at this point, with like 3 rows of teeth going down their neck, they don't seem to be that hurt by the explosions, because it even seems to touch on the fact that some of them are getting caught up in the blast, and yet they just keep on getting them back up. But even after that point, and basically what becomes almost the epilogue of the story, or at least its last chapter, we basically see like a couple months after the events of that final battle between Victoria and Charlie Manx, once Victoria has passed away from her injuries, you just get this really eerie sense from Wayne that just the fact that there is still a part of Charlie Manx which is kind of hooked into him, and he basically wasn't fully brought back, because we get to see basically the last chapter from his perspective, and you just see him having these really dark thoughts where it's like, oh hey, I should just take this knife and stab my father, I should take a hammer and beat somebody over the head with it, drive them over with a car, and he's just giggling about like a squirrel getting run down the road, and just finds things which are funny which shouldn't necessarily be funny, and you just get this really eerie sense that, oh hey, this guy might not actually be gone, he might still be like living within Wayne to some extent. But then at the very end of it, Lou ends up taking him to basically where his Christmas ornament, which Charlie hadn't picked out, which seemed to have had the last bit of his soul contained within it. He starts breaking all these Christmas ornaments to find Wayne's, and as he's doing that, all the children who were previously trapped in Christmas Land are starting to come out of the woods with no injuries, no real recollection of what's happening, I think, and they all seem perfectly fine just as they're slowly starting to be released from Christmas Land at this point. And as a result, Wayne ends up basically getting his last bit of his soul released to him, and is seemingly fine after this point. And it just seemed like a really good way to end it, because I was a little bit worried. I was like, oh, is it going to end in this really obscure way of ending the story? And then it does that, and it seems to just kind of seal off any real doubts that I had about the story after that point, because the story just, for the most part, is a very, very entertaining read. It's one that I've been reading over the last like 2 months or so, just kind of when I had an opportunity or during lunch breaks at work or what have you. And it would have just been very disappointing if it ultimately had not been a very satisfying conclusion, but the book just ends very, very well, and it's a very, very interesting ride for the entirety of it. Just again, following this life of this young girl, Vic McQueen, just seeing all the struggles that she ends up going through over the course of her life, and it's just not something which you really ever see from a novel protagonist, at least that I personally have seen. Maybe it's done a million times, but from what I've read, I haven't really seen that done before, and it made it for a very fascinating read for me. So yeah guys, those are my thoughts on N0S4A2. Let me know yours in the comments down below. Have you read it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Let me know why or why not in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you read any other of Joe Hill's novels? If so, let me know your recommendations down below. I just recently got The Fireman, so that'll probably be either the next thing that I read or review on this channel, so we'll see what happens with that. If you have not read any of Joe Hill's books, and you're maybe watching like the AMC N0S4A2 show, let me know how you think that is going, because I haven't seen it yet, and I've heard kind of mixed things from people who are watching it, so I'm very curious. Like, favorite, comment, and subscribe once again if you so choose. I appreciate it immensely. And as always, my people, my name is Nick Pell, and once again, keep on reading.